we've been looking at the successors to Caesar Augustus, the emperors that came after him. We're going through the whole succession of emperors all at once instead of taking them individually as we come to them, to kind of get a flow for who these emperors were and who was good, who was not so good, an idea of the quality. I told you early on that most of the early successors of Caesar Augustus were not very competent, and it's not until we finally get some generals coming in as emperors that the administration of the empire takes a turn for the better. So, after Caesar Augustus, who followed him? Who followed Caesar Augustus as the next emperor? Matthew? Tiberius. And what great event occurred during the reign of Tiberius? What momentous occurrence was there? What?
Jesus was crucified?
Jesus was crucified, right, during Tiberius' reign. All right, who followed Tiberius? Can you remember? Or are you already looking? Is it too late to do it without looking? All right, who's next, Stephen? Caligula. And what does the name Caligula mean? Matthew?
Little boots.
Yeah, little boots. So that wasn't his real name, that was his nickname. What do you remember about Caligula? Rick?
He was insane.
He was insane. Anything about him that you remember that indicates that?
He had a morbid pleasure for torture.
Yeah, he liked torture. All right, and what happened to him? Mia?
Wasn't assassinated by the Praetorian Guard.
Right, exactly. Assassinated by the Praetorian Guard. So who followed Caligula? Who's next? You remember, Noah?
Claudius.
Claudius. And who was Claudius in relationship to Caligula? Do you remember that, John?
Isn't he one of the cousins at the...
Oh, close, but not cousin.
He was an uncle.
Uncle. He was Uncle Claudius. Claudius was generally a good administrator, but he also appears to have persecuted the Christians. I believe that he kicked out all the Jewish Christians that were in Rome at the time, although he didn't recognize Christianity. He just thought they were Jews that were causing a disturbance. And we saw a description yesterday of him. Here's how Tacitus described Claudius ordering the death of his wife, Messalina. He told their guards and their commander to kill Messalina. A freedman was chosen to carry out the deed. Rushing ahead of the officers, he found her cowering on the ground with her mother sitting nearby. She had often disapproved of her daughter, but was now overcome by pity. "Life has passed," she said, "and there is nothing left but to seek an honorable death." But there was no honor in that spirit so corrupted with lust. The doors gave way to the oncoming attack. The commander stood before her in silence as he delivered the fatal blow. So Claudius ordered his wife to be executed. So he is that kind of guy. So as much as you could say good about his administrative ability, he had a streak of evil in him as well. Here's how then the murder of Claudius took place, according to Tacitus. He said, from this point on, the empire was changed. All obeyed a woman, that is, the new wife of Claudius. But this is a woman without feminine frivolity. She was openly severe and often arrogant. Agrippina, that's her name, Agrippina's dominance was almost masculine. So when he married Agrippina, Agrippina was a dominant woman, and she kind of took over. Her plans for murder were firm. As she bided her time, waiting for opportunity, Agrippina sought the right poison. Now, what had transpired just prior to this is that she had a son by a previous husband whose name was Nero. She convinced Claudius to put in his will the successor to Claudius would not be one of his children, but would be what was his stepson, her son, Nero. Once she had that in place, she looked for an opportunity to be rid of Claudius, so her son could then be on the throne. Do you see the intrigue here, the plotting? So Agrippina sought the right poison. A specialist in the field was chosen, and by her skill a potion prepared. It was delivered to Claudius by the eunuch who served and tasted his food, so by his food taster. And it is thought that she put the poison in mushrooms. Claudius loved mushrooms. And he ate the mushrooms, and he died. This is a look at the relationship between the Caesars. So we have Julius Caesar here. And then we follow down to Augustus. Remember, Augustus was not his son. It's a dotted line indicating that he is adopted. And of course, his name was Octavian at the time. And you may recognize a couple other names out here along the way. And then he's followed by Tiberius, who is a nephew of Augustus. And then Claudius is over here as an uncle of Tiberius. He's the next person. And then following him is another adoption of Nero. So notice all these adoptions because they don't have sons of their own. Interesting. So next we'll look at Nero. How many of you have heard of Nero? Yeah, most everybody. Pretty famous guy. Well, he was 16 years old when he came to the throne, placed there by his mother. He governed well in his early years when he was under the influence of the Roman philosopher Seneca. Gradually, however, the influence of his mother and his second wife, Poppaea Sabina, triumphed, and Nero's reign turned bloodthirsty. Soon turning against his overbearing mother, he'd had enough of her telling him what to do. This unscrupulous ruler tried to have her killed. He attempted to have her drowned by putting her on a ship. She's supposed to sail somewhere. Oh, goodbye, mother. We'll see you later. But his plans were to sink the ship and for her to drown. Well, the ship sank, but she was able to get to shore. So he missed that one. Failed with that one. He tried several ways of killing her, and every time it wasn't successful. So finally, he had her clubbed to death. So affectionate for his mother. He also poisoned the chief of the Praetorian Guard. And his wife Poppaea, he didn't wait around to have anybody else club her. He kicked her to death. See a mean streak here through these guys. In 64 CE or AD, a catastrophic fire swept through Rome, leveling some of the city's most central and most valuable real estate. Have you ever heard about the fire that took place in Rome in the time of Nero? The common expression, have you ever heard this? Nero fiddled while Rome burned. You ever heard that? Well, there was no fiddle at the time. He may have been playing his lute. He did have that. But the statement is really saying that Nero really didn't care that Rome was burning. And there were some rumors later on that he in fact had been the one to set the fire, because he wanted to rebuild that part of Rome. He was jealous of the fact that Caesar Augustus had built so many marble buildings in Rome, and he wanted to do the same. And there was a large part of Rome that was made up of shacks, wood, straw. And he felt that that was not very attractive, and so it may be that he was behind it. He certainly was not unhappy about it. And so he announced plans to build a magnificent palace on the ashes of what had burned. Well, like I said, rumors began to swirl about that Nero had been the one to start the fire, which swirled through the city. And although he arranged for food and shelter for the crowds that were left homeless, he did take the land and began construction on his palace. And he erected a bronze colossus of himself. Which was rumored to be 35 meters high. So a pretty tall statue. Whether or not Nero was responsible for the fire or its unchecked spread, it seems that he still felt like he needed a scapegoat. He looked for someone else to blame. You know, that's a common feature of those that are guilty, is if someone accuses them, what do? They accuse somebody else. You think about it, that goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden, doesn't it? God said to Adam, Adam, why did you do that? What did he say?
Eve made me.
Yes, that woman you gave me. And it says to the woman, why did you do that? It's
Snake
the
made
serpent that did it, that made me do that. All right, so it's common for humans to blame others. Well, he looks for a group of people in the city that may be unpopular, that are different from everybody else, and that he can say that they're the ones that set the fire, and that is the Christians. So he accused the Christians of being the ones that burned down part of the city. And he exacted his murderous rage on this fringe group, leading to the first Roman persecution of Christians. Unlike Claudius, who just kicked them out, he's actually imprisoning and killing Christians. In addition to that, he killed his teacher, the famous philosopher Seneca. Okay, and then here's the fire we're talking about. Nero was accused, and he blamed the fire on Christians. And some of what he did, maybe you've heard, he would take Christians and tie them to poles when he was having a garden party, or maybe along the road into his palace, smear pitch on them or tar, and then light them on fire alive. And they were human torches for his parties and for the passageway. So he thought that was good stuff. Tortured many Christians, put many of them to death in other ways, many of them in prison. In fact, it's under Nero that both Paul and Peter are executed. Paul was beheaded there in Rome. Peter, does anybody know, at least traditionally, what is said about Peter's death? You know, John?
Wasn't he crucified upside down?
Yes, that's what tradition says, that Peter was going to be crucified, and he said, I'm not worthy to be crucified in the same manner as my Lord. Can you please do it upside down? Don't know for sure if that's what happened or not. It certainly is likely that he would have been crucified. Why would Paul not have been crucified? You know? What was there about Paul that would have prevented him from being crucified?
Because he was a Roman citizen.
Very good, John. He's a Roman citizen. That deserves a ring of the bell. Good job. So that's unlike, even though there's some tradition that says that Peter was beheaded also, I think that may be unlikely because Peter was not a Roman citizen. So crucifixion would have been something that might have happened to him. All right, so Nero turns out to be a very bloodthirsty, brutal, cruel tyrant. He did bring order and efficiency to administration of Rome, and he built the Colosseum, which is still standing, and everybody has seen pictures of the Colosseum, but otherwise was a very evil man. And so eventually the Praetorian Guard turned on him as well. He was a man who was getting out of control. In fact, he would go out at night, sneak out at night, and put on the hide of an animal, disguising himself so that he could hide in the shadows, and then he would go and kill people. They began to call him the Beast, because that's how he would dress up at night. Well, the Praetorian Guard had had enough of him, and so they were making accusations. They were coming to him. He didn't want to have happen to him what happened to Caligula, and so he fled, and then he got to a place where he was away from them. They realized they were closing in, and so he committed suicide. That was his end. Now, at the time that this is taking place, in another part of the world, a part with which we're very familiar, there are some events taking place, which we'll get to in a minute, but first I want to find out what Tacitus had to say. First about the Great Fire. It said it began in shops near the circus, fanned by the winds, fed by merchandise, flames engulfed the entire district. It surged up the hills, consuming all in their path, gaining strength in the city's narrow, twisting roads. Cries of women, children, invalids, frantic people trying to help themselves or others all added to the panic. Okay, on Nero's response, however well-intentioned, his relief measures were in vain, because a rumor had spread that while fire ravaged the city, Nero was on his private stage singing, not playing the fiddle, but singing. He thought himself a singer. In fact, as he got involved in the Olympic Games, and he added an event of singing in the Olympic Games. Why? Because he wanted to be able to win. He also entered the chariot race, and interestingly enough, people in the other chariots just kept falling over, kept tipping, they kept falling out of the chariots, whatever it took to allow Nero to win, because you don't want to beat the emperor. So he participated. He thought of himself as an athlete. He thought of himself as an actor, as a singer, as a musician, and so he was singing while Rome was burning. Now, I don't know if you've heard this or not. There has been a lot of speculation over the years as to whether Nero was himself the Antichrist, and I think there are some things that make for interesting consideration here. Like I said, he's referred to as the Beast, not only by his contemporaries, but it seems to me in the book of Revelation by John, and this is my opinion, looking at this as an historian and as a Bible student. This is not any way an official position of the school or any church or anything. This is me telling you how it appears to me. All right. I think he's referred to as the Beast by John. His number is calculated to be 666. We're told in Revelation 13:18. If you take Nero Caesar, the Latin, and add up the value of the letters, remember in Latin and Greek and in Hebrew, you have no numbers like we do 1, 2, 3. You use letters. You're probably familiar with the Roman numerals. A V means what?
5.
Right. And an X is
10.
So if you do that with Nero Caesar in Latin, it adds up to 666. In the value of the Hebrew letters. I'm sorry, not the Latin, the Hebrew letters of his name. Ancient accounts of Nero's life identify Nero as a desperately wicked individual who grossly violated each of the 10 Commandments through a long litany of disgusting demonstrations of depravity. Nero is rightly identified as the Beast of Revelation, the archetypal Antichrist, because of the unique and horrible quality of the Great Tribulation that he ignited. Now, following Nero, there was a period of civil war that takes place in which 4 emperors ruled in quick succession. By the way, in the book of Revelation, John tells us that there have been, let's see, there have been 4 kings. Is it 4? I gotta try to remember. Okay, good. Julius Caesar, Caesar Augustus, Tiberius, Claudius. Yeah, John says that there have been 4, and no, I'm missing somebody. So I think he said the 6th now is. Anyway, that would have been Nero. And then he says, and then following there will be one who rules for a short time, and then will come another. Well, these 4 guys were a short time, quick succession, only for a period of a few months altogether. And then we get to Vespasian. Vespasian, at the time that this is going on, is commanding the troops putting down a Jewish revolt in Israel. He has gone through Galilee and destroyed town after town in Judea, and finally he's at Jerusalem. He's ready to surround Jerusalem when word comes, when his troops actually say, you should be the emperor, and so he leaves Jerusalem to go back and become the emperor. But the problem is that there is no, remember we said before at the very beginning, there was no set way to bring about the next emperor. There was no established succession, and so this just demonstrates that. And then now finally a general, Vespasian, comes in to take over as emperor. So that's where he comes from. We'll talk more about him later. So now we come to Vespasian. And he's the first non-patrician to rule Rome. I'm sorry, I said Nero built the Colosseum. I didn't think that was right when I said it. Vespasian is the one who built the Colosseum in Rome. That's why he's pictured here. So he came back from the Jewish revolt, left his son Titus in charge after Nero committed suicide, and 4 other people tried to rule within the next few months. Vespasian brought order and efficiency to the administration of Rome's affairs, and was in that way a good ruler. Not much else to say about his rule, except like I said, he built the Colosseum, which is where the gladiators fought. He was the general in charge of the first Jewish revolt. His son then, Titus, oversaw the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, which was the second temple. It explains about the first temple already having been destroyed, the one that was built by Solomon. Okay, you don't need to have all that down. Just remember that Vespasian was the first non-patrician and the first general. Well, I mean, Julius Caesar was a general too. But Julius Caesar is technically not considered an emperor because it was still under the Republic. But I still think you can consider him an emperor de facto, if not by law. And then, of course, the Colosseum and the destruction of the temple takes place under his rule, but by his son Titus. When Vespasian dies, he is succeeded by his son Titus. And then when Titus dies, Titus's brother, another son of Vespasian, Domitian, takes over. Titus, as we've said, destroyed Jerusalem. His reign as emperor was pretty short. It was only for a couple of years, so he didn't really accomplish a lot. There is a triumphal arch in Rome that demonstrates his victory over the Jews and the destruction of the temple. Let's see, I thought I had a picture of that. Yeah, there it is. Maybe coming up. Yeah. There's the triumphal arch of Titus. Actually, his brother Domitian is the one that built the arch dedicated to him. And as a part of that, on that arch, you can see this picture. You can see captives carrying the menorah, and other things from the temple in Jerusalem. So part of the figure on the arch of Titus is showing his victory over Jerusalem and all the slaves that he brought back. We'll talk more specifically about that when we get to that chronologically. Here is a colorized version. You can see it maybe a little bit better. The menorah, table of showbread, I think that is. And during Titus's reign is when Mount Vesuvius overflowed. Have you ever heard of Mount Vesuvius? $1.5 million tons of lava per second. That was in 79 AD. It destroyed the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. There's a picture, an image from what's been found at Pompeii. You've probably seen these before, haven't you? Where the person's not there, but it's ash that came from the volcano, the lava, and so on. Made these images of people. I mean, they're in the act of fleeing. You can imagine how quickly that must have happened. Well, Titus is then followed by his brother, Domitian. And he is the one that really begins to persecute Christians. Titus was rather generous in how he treated people. Domitian was more of a despot, a tyrant, ruling from 81 to 96. And he eventually was murdered by his wife in 96. But the most awful thing he did was persecuting Christians. He's the one that brought Christians into the arena to face beasts like the lions. So when you hear about Christians being fed to the lions, that was under Domitian. Interesting thing about Domitian, for years he knew exactly when he was going to be murdered. He knew the date that he was going to be murdered. You know, and this is strange, but this is what comes down to us. He knew it would be the 18th of September in the year 96 during the 5th morning hour. He knew the time of day that he would be murdered. Well, this is how it came about. As a young man, he refused a dish of mushrooms that his father, the Emperor Vespasian, joked, and when he did so, his father joked that it was more in keeping with his destiny for him to be afraid of swords instead of mushrooms. The historian Suetonius says this: astrological predictions had long since warned him in what year and day he would die. They even specified the hour and manner. So it was astrologers that told him the exact hour that he would die. Now, I mean, as Christians, we would say astrology is bogus, but if this is true, there was something working there that enabled them to be able to determine this. And so, you know, he lived a life of being gloomy and paranoid and humorless. And as the year approached, he became even more anxious, you can imagine. He had the walls of his exercise room lined with highly polished moonstone so he could watch what was going on behind his back. It was like having mirrors all around. With the help of his astrologers, he pored over the horoscopes of Rome's most powerful men, sniffing out potential regicides. In other words, he checked his astrological charts for all the powerful men to see which of them might be likely to try to murder him. He even exiled and then executed his trusted secretary because the scribe had helped Nero commit suicide 27 years before. Domitian was deeply conflicted about astrology. He believed in it, but he also hoped its predictions could be avoided if preventative actions were taken. To prove the point, the day before his assassination, he commanded the astrologer Escalatario to predict the manner of his own death. So, okay, you got this astrologer, I want you to predict your own death. How's that going to happen? And when the astrologer forecast that he was fated to be torn to pieces by dogs, Domitian had him executed on the spot in order to disprove the astrological sign, and then had him thrown on a funeral pyre, burn him up. A rainstorm, however, scattered the servants supervising the cremation and put out the fire. The roasted corpse then was torn to pieces by a pack of scavenging dogs, just like the astrologer had predicted. So you can imagine how Domitian's, he tries to circumvent the prediction, and it comes true anyway. It terrified him. That evening, perhaps at dinner, a guest offered him a gift of apples, his favorite fruit. His appetite, however, was ruined by fear, and Domitian told his servants to save them until tomorrow if he was spared to eat them. He then turned to his guests and said, "The moon will be bloodied as she enters Aquarius, and a deed will be done that will be the talk of the entire world, and we'll have to find out tomorrow what happened. Were the predictions true or not?" Make sure you look over the emperors and try to keep straight who is who.